The sun was just touching the ridge when I stepped out of the barn that first morning and saw them. Two men in pressed navy uniforms standing dead center between my Cabernet rows like they'd been planted there overnight. The taller one had his thumbs hooked in his duty belt, trying to look bored and official at the same time. The shorter one kept sweeping the horizon with a cheap pair of binoculars, the kind you buy at a truck stop. Both wore sidearms and nylon holsters that had never known a police armory. On their sleeves was a round patch with a stylized pine tree and the words Willow Creek Estates Community Protection Force. I almost laughed out loud. My vineyard has been in my family since 1978. We predate the subdivision by 20 years and 3 county zoning changes. Their little pine tree empire ends at a barbed wire fence 200 yards east of where they were standing. I'm Richard Harlan, 58. Retired Sacramento PD detective sergeant, 28 years on the job, the last 12 in major crimes. I've been shot at, spit on, lied to by people who could sell ice to penguins, and I thought I'd left all that behind when I bought out my cousins and turned the old Harlan place into a proper winery. I wanted quiet. I wanted dirt under my nails that didn't come from a crime scene. I wanted mornings that smelled like grape leaves and wet soil instead of gunpowder and desperation. Apparently the universe had other plans. I walked toward them slow, boots crunching on the gravel path between the vines. The tall one saw me first and squared his shoulders the way civilians do when they're pretending they've done this before. Morning, he called, voice flat, practiced. Routine border integrity check. I stopped 10 feet away and let the silence do some work. You're on the wrong side of the fence for that, son. He offered the kind of thin smile men give when they think paperwork makes them bulletproof. Willow Creek Estates has expanded observation rights on contiguous properties for community safety. I looked past him to the shorter one, who was now pretending to write something important on a clipboard. You two get lost on the way to the mall? The smile vanished. Sir, cooperation is strongly advised. I took one more step. Not threatening, just closing the distance enough that he had to tilt his head up. Here's some cooperation for you. Turn around, walk back to whatever golf cart brought you, and don't come back unless you've got a warrant signed by a judge who isn't retired to your subdivision. We clear. They left, but not before the tall one muttered something about non-compliance documentation. I watched until their navy backs disappeared over the rise. Then I stood there a long time, feeling the old familiar itch between my shoulder blades. The one that always showed up right before things went sideways. They sent Victor Ramsey 3 days later. I was tightening a drip line when I heard the slow crunch of tires on gravel. A silver Tahoe with faded county decals pulled up just short of my gate and sat there idling like it was too important to turn off. The driver's door opened and Victor stepped out. 6'3", maybe 250, most of it gone soft, but still big enough to block the sun. He wore aviators and an old duty jacket with the sheriff patches half picked off, threads dangling like surrender flags. His right hand hovered near his hip the way ex-cops do when they miss the weight of real authority. Victor had been a deputy until the review board decided he liked his fists more than department policy. That was 15 years ago. Some men never get over losing the badge. Richard Harlan, he called, voice thick with cigarettes and self-importance. That's me. Victor Ramsey, Community Enforcement Director, Willow Creek Estates. He let the title hang there like it was supposed to impress me. I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned on the gate. Director of what exactly? He ignored the question. Your property abuts the community. That places it under our safety perimeter. I'm here to conduct a visual threat assessment. I studied the loose threads on his jacket. Victor, the only threat out here is Pierce's disease and gophers. You're a quarter mile outside your jurisdiction and about 15 years outside your pay grade. Go home. His jaw flexed. People are concerned. People need to mind their own damn business. He took one step closer, close enough I could smell the wintergreen shoe he used to cover the whiskey. This can go easy or it can go hard, Harlan. I smiled for the first time all morning. Victor, the last man who gave me that choice, spent 6 months learning how to eat through a straw. Go back to your gated cul-de-sac before you do something we both regret. He stood there a few seconds longer, trying to stare me down with eyes that had forgotten how. Then he climbed back into the Tahoe and left a 1/4 inch of rubber on my driveway getting out. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't even the beginning. The drone showed up first, a black quadcopter buzzing my rooftop at 6:30 the next morning. Then the fake 911 calls started, illegal machine guns, unlicensed distilling, a chemical smell drifting toward the elementary school 2 miles away. Deputies came, apologized, left. One of them, Mike Ortega, pulled me aside after the 3rd visit. Somebody's got a real hard-on for you, Rich. This stinks of a personal vendetta. I told Mike I had a pretty good idea who. Then the cameras went up. I found the first one bolted high on a PG&E pole and straight at my back porch. Industrial housing, weatherproof, cable running down the wood like a ratlin. Sticker on the side, Willow Creek Estates Oversight Initiative. The second was tucked in the branches of a valley oak, pointed at my bedroom window. The third was disguised as a trail cam, but pointed at my barn door instead of the deer path. 5 in total, all blinking tiny red lights at me whenever I stepped outside after dark. I didn't tear them down. I waved. Because the thing about watchers is they hate being watched back. Then came the USB stick. I found it wedged into the housing of my exterior security camera one night after closing up the barn. Cheap black plastic, no markings. I carried it inside with a pair of pliers, fired up the old air-gapped laptop I still keep from my detective days, and plugged it in. Malware. Crude but nasty. Designed to loop my own camera feeds to a remote server and give live access to whoever was on the other end. Victor's fingerprints were all over the code, metaphorically speaking. Most people would have wiped the drive and called a lawyer. I did something else. I fed it. With help from my foreman, Luis, we staged 3 nights of theater. We hauled canvas sacks of pure white powdered yeast nutrient across the yard at dusk, speaking in low, urgent tones about getting this product moved before anyone sees. We stacked crates marked with hazmat stickers that actually held pH buffer. We even poured a 5-gallon jug of red food coloring into an oak barrel and swirled it dramatically for the camera. Victor watched every second. My router log showed his device connected for longer and longer stretches, like a kid who couldn't look away from the cookie jar he was about to rob. He took the bait so hard, he practically swallowed the hook. The raid came on a Friday night when I was hosting my annual pre-harvest barbecue. 20 friends under the string lights, ribs on the smoker, a bluegrass trio playing soft in the background. Kids chasing fireflies between the vines. Perfect evening. Then the lights hit. Red and blue strobing across 100 acres of grapes like the 4th of July gone wrong. 3 marked units, 1 unmarked tactical van. Deputies jumping out with long guns. My guests froze. Someone dropped a plate. Victor was out of the van before it stopped rolling, screaming about exigent circumstances and probable cause. He made a beeline for the stacked canvas bags we'd left under a tarp for exactly this moment. Mike Ortega tried to stop him. Ramsey, stand down, this is our scene. Victor wasn't listening. He ripped the tarp off, yanked his own knife, and slashed the first bag from top to bottom. 60 pounds of ultra-fine Chardonnay yeast exploded into his face like a blizzard in July. He came up choking, gagging, white from hairline to belt buckle, eyes wild. Looked like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man after a bad divorce. I raised my glass of iced tea. Careful, Victor. Inhale too much of that, and you'll ferment from the inside. Half the deputies lost it. One actually had to turn away to keep from laughing on body cam. Mike stepped forward, voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. Victor Ramsey, how exactly did you know what was in those bags? The silence that followed was sweeter than any wine I've ever bottled. Victor tried to bluff, something about community intelligence sources, but the hole was already dug. Accessing private security feeds without a warrant is a felony. Doing it to manufacture probable cause is a whole bouquet of felonies. Mike cuffed him right there between my trellis posts while yeast drifted off him like dandruff from a very angry ghost. But Victor was never the queen bee. He was the drone. The queen was Evelyn Whitaker, 63, former real estate broker, 11-year president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA, and apparently the architect of a plan to annex my Vineyard for Phase 3 expansion, once I'd been scared or framed into selling cheap. Paul Whitmore came to me at 11:07 p.m. Exactly 1 week later. Paul was the treasurer, a nervous accountant who'd been looking the other way while Evelyn cooked the books. He stood on my dark porch shaking so hard his teeth clicked. They're out of control, Richard. Victor's got a command center in his garage. Monitors, hard drives labeled by address, a map with colored pins. Your property is circled in red and marked primary target. There's talk about worse than cameras. He handed me a folded slip of paper with login credentials to Evelyn's private cloud drive. I can't be part of this anymore. Inside that drive was everything. Forged vendor contracts, kickbacks for $1,800 a month to Ramsey Consulting LLC, emails telling Victor to manufacture leverage on the Vineyard owner, and worst of all, surveillance photos taken inside neighbors' homes at night. Bedrooms, bathrooms. One shot of the Miller family's 16-year-old daughter getting out of the shower. Timestamped. I felt the old rage rise, the same one that used to keep me awake after child abuse cases. But I kept my voice level. Paul, you just bought yourself a conscience. Don't waste it. The next morning I set up a card table at the entrance to Willow Creek Estates under a hand-painted sign, your HOA dues at work. I laid out poster-sized prints of the bedroom photos, faces blurred for decency, but everyone knew whose windows those were. I stacked the bank records, the emails, the kickback ledgers. By 8:45 I had 100 neighbors and 3 news crews. When I read Evelyn's email aloud, find something on Harlan, anything, so we can force the sale and break ground next spring, the crowd went feral. For board members resigned by group text before 10 o'clock. Someone started chanting jail. Jail. Evelyn locked herself in the clubhouse and called her lawyer. She made it as far as the interstate with $146,000 cash in a Louis Vuitton suitcase before the state police lit her up doing 90 in a 65. The trials were almost boring after that. Prosecutors love paper trails, and we gave them a freeway. Victor took a plea for 24 years when they showed the jury the arsenal in his closet. 3 unserialized ARs, a sawed-off shotgun, and 500 flex cuffs. Evelyn cried on the stand, claiming she was just trying to protect property values. The jury deliberated 3 hours and change. The judge, a woman who'd spent 20 years putting dirty cops away, dissolved the entire HOA board from the bench and appointed a receiver to run the place until people who weren't felons could hold an election. 6 months later the vines are so heavy with fruit the trellis wires are singing. Paul, of all people, is the new HOA president, elected because he spent the campaign saying, please, anybody but me. Day 1 he fired the protection force, sold the golf cart, and turned the security budget into a community garden. I built a new gate sign out of oak and brass. Private property. Real sheriff by appointment only. No HOA jurisdiction beyond this point. Trespassers will be composted. Last Saturday, we held a harvest party. Half the subdivision showed up with kids and dogs and folding chairs. Somebody brought a sheet cake decorated like Victor covered in powdered sugar wearing handcuffs. We laughed until our sides hurt. When the fire burned low and the stars came out sharp over the vines, I raised a glass of the new reserve, deep garnet in the firelight, and looked at all of them, neighbors again instead of prisoners. To the people who stood up, I said. To the ones who were afraid but spoke anyway. And to never, ever letting petty tyrants in polo shirts tell us how to live on land we paid for with blood and mortgages. The cheer that went up rattled the windows all the way to the county line. Now I want to hear from you. Straight, no filter. When someone wraps themselves in fake authority and comes after your home, your family, your peace, is there ever a point where meeting fire with fire is not just justified but required? Or do you believe the high road is always the only road, no matter how much they burn the low one down around you? Drop your honest take below. I read every single comment. This stuff happens in subdivisions and small towns all over America. Let's talk about where the line actually is.